Joining me today is Sami Elmansoury, a well-known activist in the Arab and Muslim American community. His community activity includes leadership in various organizations that encourage tolerance and dialogue. Sami is also involved in the Democratic Party, having served as an active volunteer and organizer for the Obama for American campaign, where he sought to bring minority communities into the activist fold by way of voter registration drives, community-wide receptions, and direct outreach. Sami's grandparents immigrated to the United States from Egypt in the 1960s, when his grandfather was commissioned as an engineer with NASA's Apollo 11 mission that sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. Sami received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Rutgers University in New Jersey. He presently is an executive with Help Mountain Educational Services, a company dedicated to revolutionizing education by providing exceptional quality, increased affordability, and excellence in exam preparation, ESI, and foreign language study to companies, government agencies, academic institutions, and individuals of all ages and backgrounds alike. Sami, welcome, and thank you for joining me on the premiere edition of Liberation Square.
Thank you, Randa. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, Randa. Thank you.
Sami, let's start by those viewers who may not know about your various activities in the Arab and Muslim American community here in the U.S. What are the types of activities and organizations you're involved in?
Well, I'm privileged and honored to be very active in both New York City and New Jersey and Washington and several other areas in the country, doing work that ultimately not only represents the Arab Muslim community, but ultimately defines us as an American community above all. I work with the Office of the Borough President of Manhattan. I do immigration rights. And what we do is we ultimately meet and we discuss immigration issues regarding the Arab American community, the Chinese American community, any other community. The struggles that they face are all common. And we advise the mayor and advise the borough president on issues of how to better the situation for immigrants in New York City. I also work with the Muslim Public Affairs Council on their board of New York and the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC, in New Jersey. So, you know, I try to, use my youth as best as I can and just keep it going. And there's a lot of work to do and two people to do it. So.
Well, Sami, many of us in the Arab American community here in the United States are first or second generation. Our parents emigrated from the Middle East, my father from Egypt, your grandfather from Egypt. But our parents and grandparents encourage us to become doctors and engineers and scientists. What made you go into politics?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned those three professions because my grandfather is an engineer, my father is a surgeon, and my mother is a scientist. So
there you go, proof positive.
So you can find every stereotype
exactly
in my family. Interestingly enough, my sister is a PhD student at the University of London studying history, and I graduated in political science, and I'm currently a political activist. So we both took different directions. And one of those things, really, the inspiration largely comes from my parents, obviously, but also from my grandfather, who you mentioned prior. He came to the United States really not expecting to stay. He came on a contract. He was working in Cape Canaveral. His work was so profound, and he's such a, right now, I mean, God bless him, he's still alive, and he's healthy, and he's well, and he, lives in New Jersey. But his work was so profound that, they just kept extending his contract and eventually became a citizen. And that, for me, is such an inspiration because when he came here, there were very few Arab Americans, very few Muslim Americans in that area in Florida. They faced some very difficult discrimination. And I look at it as, just like any other community, we go through struggles. But you know what? At the end of the day, we are very proud to be American, and just like everyone else, we have a role and a responsibility to give back to this country.
How do we encourage more young people like yourself to go into politics as a career? After all, here in America, I myself am a lawyer by training, practiced law, did the legal thing, and then went straight into politics. And I would, venture to say I've had a long career in politics. Politics is actually a career here in the United States. It doesn't just include running for office, being a candidate, or being a legislator. There are actual careers serving on the staff of the different policymakers, legislators. I worked for President Bush. You can actually work for a president. So politics is a career here in the United States. How do we encourage more young Arab Americans to get involved in politics as a career?
Well, Randa, one thing that we really have to get past is this idea, and I agree with you 100%. It's critical, and it's about time. But one thing we have to get past is this idea that we're going home. You know, and I think that in my personal
home is here.
Exactly.
Home
My
is the
personal
United States.
observation
Yes.
from many people in the community is sometimes they feel that they're still guests in a country that's their only home. I don't have dual citizenship. America is my home, and I'm very proud to say that.
Right.
And so many people, you know, initially when immigrant waves come to the country, they often have this kind of guest feeling that they're coming, they're going to have a better life, and then eventually they'll go back and retire. And that's not the case for us, because this is the only home that we know. And I think that if we begin to ingrain in the youth, you know, that America is a place where everyone has a voice, where everybody can participate and partake and vote and change issues and change the world, then that alone should serve as inspiration enough for our youth to kind of put down what the traditional career might, you know, direction might take them, and say, you know what, I am going to do this. I can make a difference. Nobody would have expected that Barack Obama would have been elected president several years ago. But look, it happened. Whatever our politics, it was a remarkable event. And I look at that as a testament to the greatness of America. And I think that we should all realize that our responsibility lies profoundly in serving this country, because it has given us really all the freedom that we know.
Right. Don't you think also a problem is, especially with some members of the older generation, they're definitely quick to criticize many of the policies that America implements, particularly the foreign policy of America in the Middle East. But don't you think the wise solution to that would be Arab Americans gaining political strength through working for some of these government agencies that shape that policy and getting involved in politics in order to shape that policy? That if you don't have a seat at the table, you're not going to be able to shape any sort of policy or the law. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree 100%. I mean, when you have a traffic ticket, you don't show up to court, you forfeit your right to defend or to stand up for yourself, to give yourself a voice about that ticket. You know, it works. That's the way that it works. That's the grassroots level. It goes all the way up to the top. You know, if we are not participating, then yes, things will not always be the way that we might want them or envision them to be. And the frank truth is, America is not perfect. No country is perfect, you know, but that's the point. In order to form a more perfect union, you know, America is always working to better itself. And we have a very big stake to play in that. So instead of saying, you know, well, we don't like the way that, you know, that we don't like, you know, the policies regarding the Iraq War, this, whatever situation we're faced with, we should rather get in there and sit at the table, you know, like the intelligent people that we are, and say, you know what, this is our position on this. Don't complain to your family at the dinner table. Get out there and talk to your leaders. You know, calling your congressman still goes a long way. You know, helping them with their campaigns, attending meetings, going to, even at the grassroots level, a PTA meeting, and then starting all the way at the top, going to a meeting at the White House. All of that makes a difference, and more Arab Americans and more Muslim Americans have to put their foot into the door.
Absolutely.
You know, we have the right, so we should use it.
I'll tell you about a personal experience, and then I'll ask you about one of your own personal experiences. When I worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Spencer Abraham, the only Arab American senator
Secretary of Energy,
serving at that time in the Senate, we were successful through our efforts, and this is literally one senator and one staff person, myself, for pushing and encouraging the administration at the time, the Clinton administration, to lift the travel ban on Lebanon. It was something that the American government had imposed, that U.S. citizens could not travel to Lebanon because of the dangerous situation there. But one person in one office made the difference in pushing the administration to lift that travel ban. Another example is they were going to cut money and finances from the budget for some of our allies in the Middle East. If we had not been at that table there, that money would have been cut for some of our allies in the Middle East. We also were successful in passing the first resolution on tolerance towards Islam. That was in 1996, a long time ago. So my personal experience in government has been, if you are there, one person can make a difference if you speak up and you work the system from the inside. Exactly. What's been your experience in New York and New Jersey in helping shape immigration law with respect to these these particular issues?
Well, you know, the one thing that I will definitely say is when you're in New York City, for example, people don't tend to ask right away, you know, what's your background, what's your origin? You know, you tend to really, the one thing I love about New York City is that it's a very American city. Everybody is just American and everybody's working in the same direction. I mean, on our task force, for example, you know, we have Jewish Americans, we have, you know, Arab Americans, we have South Asians, we have Chinese Americans. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I think that the critical point here, okay, really is, you know, we should not be working for our own issues alone, you know? And I know that, you know, with your experience, I'm so, that's why it's an incredible opportunity to be here, because, you know, your experience is phenomenal. And just when we get in there, you know, when you get into the White House, for example, you realize that all of a sudden, energy matters. All of a sudden, you know, gas prices, all this stuff matters to everybody.
That's right.
And that's the kind of the direction that we should push. And when I sit on that task force, the concerns of the Chinese American community matters to me. They matter to me. And therefore, when something affects my community, the Chinese American community then comes around and says, we're going to stand up for you. We're going to stand with you. That happened with the King hearings. That happened with a lot of things. It's a give and take scenario.
That's great.
And that's been my experience, that when you give a lot, people will run towards you.
Great. Well, let's talk about the King hearings, Sami.
Sure,
Our favorite topic of the show today,
Yes.
Liberation Square. So, Congressman Peter King, Republican from New York, held hearings recently on the role and the radicalization of American Muslims in the U.S. today and that community's response to it. Sami, I know that you were at the hearings. I know that you met with Congressman Peter King to express your concern about these hearings and to dialogue with him about why it was he chose to hold these hearings. So why don't you start by giving us your perspective on why Congressman Peter King chose to hold these hearings to begin with?
Well, first of all, there's some details about the hearings that are confidential that I won't share. But yet the meeting, I should say the meeting that we had with him. But the meetings are public. He did tweet about it, you know, and so he definitely has let his constituents know that he did meet with us as young American, Muslim, and Arab American leaders. Right. You know, when I sat down with Congressman King, one of the main things that we expressed to him and told him, I mean, his main criticism was that the American Muslims and Arab Americans in this country do not assimilate and they do not make an effort to integrate into American society, which I think is ludicrous because we really do, and we really do try.
And he's from New York, Sami?
He's from New York, and that was his claim. And one of the things, though, that I told him was, well, who are you speaking with? Who have you been speaking with? And he mentioned the name of the imam so-and-so and leader of so-and-so. And I told him, well, that's maybe one of the problems is that you're meeting with people who may not necessarily be as familiar with American culture and American society and what it really means to be American. And I asked him, how many times have you really met with young, you know, American-born Arabs and Muslims? You know, how many times? And he honestly could not give me an answer. And that, I think, is the main problem, is that many times our leaders, like Congressman King, they're going forward and they're assuming that the viewpoint of one, you know, group of immigrants might reflect the viewpoint of a real indigenous American community, like those of us who are American-born and proud of that. Right. And you know, we addressed him on that note, and we told him basically, you know, that Congressman, you ultimately, you know, you're telling us, he said, the moderates don't speak out. That's another thing he said. He said moderates do not speak out. They're silent, and they let all the radicals take the voice. And the funny thing is, you know, he had a controversial news program playing on in the background. I won't mention which one. And I pointed back and I said, no, the problem is they're not giving us the voice. We're willing. We're very willing. We're willing to get out there. We're willing to criticize our own community on points that, you know, need criticism. However, you know, that doesn't sell, according to you. That doesn't really make newspapers, and that's the problem. So he's listening to controversial news sources. He's meeting with imams who may not necessarily understand what it means to be an American Muslim or an Arab American, you know, in this country. And he's deducing, and he's taking anecdotal evidence. You know, he's coming forward and he's a couple of stories of people who got radicalized, and he's saying, you know what? That shows you what the American Muslim community and the Arab American community, that's the direction they're going, which is ludicrous.
Right. He did point out in his hearings that there were several cases of what's called homegrown terrorism here in the United States, where clearly Americans were radicalized here in the States and tried to commit terrorist acts against the United States. Most of those acts were unsuccessful and were not fulfilled. Why? Because who reported those acts?
Yes, in
American
I believe,
Muslims.
Yeah, about 40% of the cases almost, I mean, that it was directly from the American Muslim community. They came forward and said, you know, these individuals, they're up to something that we're not happy about, and we need them, you know, to be taken care of. And that proves something, you know, alone, in and of itself. I mean, these people are just citizens. They're not required to report anything by law, but they went and did their citizen duty, and they came forward and said, you know what, we're going to turn in our own, you know, and that's something that, you know, obviously part of the accusation was, you know, the Muslim community does not do that.
Right. Another point, sort of tangentially related, the 9/11 hijackers, all 19 of them, were they Muslims? Yes. Were any of them American citizens? No.
No.
Did any of them live here for an extended period of time?
No.
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 In fact, when they did come here, for the limited amount of time that they were here, they never even infiltrated or integrated with the Arab American and Muslim American community in America.
Exactly.
I think they may have attended one mosque service. Why? Because our community is smart enough to know. Our community asks questions. Who are you? Why are you here? Where are you coming from? Who is your family? What village do you belong to? What tribe might you belong to?
Exactly.
Who are your relatives? And these 9/11 hijackers did not infiltrate our community here in America. And that needs to be known.
I would argue it's
Americans.
harder to be accepted into a mosque than it is to walk into City Hall and have a conversation with anybody. You know, I mean,
Right.
it's an absolutely good point. And here's the damage, and here's the problem with things like the King hearings. I mean, you know, I mean, we all understand the need to protect the homeland. I mean, we're just as concerned as any other community.
Right.
At the same time, the problem comes down to the isolation factor and the alienation factor that comes with that.
Right.
The more that, you know, a congressman like Peter King, who has the responsibility to protect all of us, he's the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. His responsibility goes to Arabs and Muslims as well in America, you know,
Absolutely.
those of that background. And yet the problem is when you go and you tell, you know, youth, well, you're American as apple pie, and you know, we want you here, and you know, you're part of this country. But then on the flip side, you come and you say, you know what, we're going to not really trust you. We kind of want to trust you, but we don't trust you.
Right.
Well, then how are they going to in turn trust their government? And how are they going to in turn feel like they're at home?
Right.
And we need to work against that by allowing, not only empowering moderate voices and I should say mainstream voices, but also making sure that our leaders, okay, it's not being politically correct. You know, Congressman King says, he keeps saying, I'm not going to be politically correct. That's not being politically correct, it's being sensible. And it's being a true leader who can address all Americans and make all Americans understand that they are safe here at home.
Right.
And that's what I think Congressman King is missing, and that's what he's lacking in what he's doing.
Right. Now, also part of his hearings focused on what is the community's response to this. Does Congressman King feel like the community's not doing enough in cooperation with law enforcement?
Well, unlike what, you know, Sheriff Libaka said and others, yeah, unfortunately that's part of his allegation, is that the community is really not cooperating with law enforcement. We're not, as a community as a whole, we're not really giving information that we should be giving, which has been debunked by so many forces within the law enforcement community, and I can't call that anything more than maybe playing politics, because I think that there are many people who are legitimately concerned and afraid to go forward to law enforcement because they themselves don't want to be on the radar, on the map, even though they're innocent people. You know, there have been horror stories in the community and people who have been falsely accused of many things. So the first step is for the law enforcement community, in conjunction with the American Muslim community, to develop trust. Without trust, there can be no possible good relationship. And trust does not include just coming in and giving a workshop and then spying in the background. Trust includes befriending each other and also integrating American Muslims into law enforcement, bringing them in,
That's right.
putting them in there and letting them go defend America.
Right,
exactly.
right. Absolutely.